I don't mean to sound clickbaity or anything like that when I say this, but I have to pose a question to you guys. Are silent protagonists dead? Should they not exist in 2019? I've seen various opinions on this topic on the internet, and I've seen it around in other places too, and spoken to some people about it. Some people are a fan of silent protagonists, while others are not. Some people feel like it's the developers being lazy and just not hiring a voice actor, while others think it's just tradition. But I want to try and provide a middle ground and give my reasons as to why I think that silent protagonists are here to stay, but also why some people might think that silent protagonists need to go. So let's start with the very first thing that I actually already mentioned in the first place: tradition. A lot of the time, most silent protagonists that you see nowadays come from series that have established them as a silent protagonist and they've been silent for a very, very, very long time. Games like The Legend of Zelda, the Elder Scrolls series, to an extent Fallout, kinda to an extent Persona, games like these have a silent protagonist. Maybe not completely silent, as sometimes they'll have a voice line, or they'll say, oh, ow, ooh, it's stuff like that. But overall, they don't have voice lines that they actually say that other NPCs in the game can interact with, or that the player can pick up on, outside of a few exceptions to the rule. So most people would agree that if a character like Link were to speak all of a sudden and have full voice lines, I'm ignoring the example that you're thinking, erase that from your mind. Not only would it be weird, but it'd also be very off-putting to what you probably expected in your head. It's kind of the same dilemma of, I've had this voice for this character in my head for whatever comic or manga or whatever I'm reading this whole time, but for the character to suddenly have a voice to them, it takes you out of it. A prime example can be seen in Fallout 4, where the main protagonist, whoever you pick, either one, is voiced and actually does have a personality. And while you can choose what they're going to say and what they're going to do, at the end of the day, they do still have their own personality overall, and that limits the amount of options you have. The whole point of a silent protagonist is so you can have the freedom to choose whatever option you want, just like in old school choose your own adventure stories. The main problem with a silent protagonist suddenly being voiced is that now you can't really project yourself onto that character. Now your dialogue options might not be what the character is actually going to say. There could be a character in a game that can come up to you and be like, hi, my name is so-and-so, what's yours? And then you'll have an option that says retort, but it doesn't really go into much detail because the character's gonna say it or do it themselves. So you say, oh, I'm gonna retort, maybe it's witty. No, he punches him in the doggone face and you're like, whoa, what happened? Hey, your partner didn't like that. I didn't know that that's what I would do. Now you can argue that could be on the fault of the developers for not really thinking of more options to go with that, but at the same time I can't really blame the developers altogether, because the longer you keep Troy Baker in the office, the more you'll have to pay him. The more lines and variety of lines that he has to say, the more you gotta pay him. And let's face it, some developers just don't have that kind of money. So going the traditional route may be better in that sense, especially if that game, again, already had a long running line of games where the protagonist is typically silent. However, if I'm arguing for the other side, times are changing. With the technology that we have these days, characters can be very expressive. So there is absolutely no excuse for some characters that are traditionally voiceless to be dolls. They should have more expressions, they should have more things that they're doing, even if they don't talk. A prime example of this could be found in Dragon Quest XI, which I absolutely loved playing, but if I had to say one gripe I had with it, it's that the main protagonist doesn't feel like he needs to be there. Yes, he's the chosen one, but he really doesn't have that much influence over everything. People are making decisions for him. You can't really say much outside of when he just gestures, moves his hands, the typical, hey, I'm not looking at the camera, but they want to know what's going on, so I'm going to look away from you guys and then just move my hands. Yeah, I'm talking right now. If you're going to have a character be voiceless in those situations, then they need to be more expressive in others. Actions speak louder than words, and that's what these characters should be doing at the end of the day, if they're going to be silent. Otherwise, they might as well be voiced, and voice protagonists are typically the ones people relate to more for those who don't want to project themselves onto a character. And in some cases, you can still project yourself onto a certain character and all that. Look at Geralt from The Witcher 3, or just Geralt in general. You can choose what he's going to say and still have influence over his decisions and say, well, this is what I would say, this is what I would do, and it would still feel right. You also have protagonists like Joker from Persona 5, who does talk every now and then, like in battles, or sometimes with throwaway lines in cutscenes and whatnot, but overall he's pretty silent. But he does have an overwhelming personality to him. He tends to be kind of snarky, rebellious, sarcastic, and whatnot. Those are the typical options you tend to get from him. But again, you can pick dialogue options that are pretty varied that can just carry a conversation. Either way around, people want to voice protagonists because they want to be able to connect with the world and the character and want to have an interesting backstory, which you can still have with a silent protagonist, but having a voice protagonist in a lot of cases helps them relate to the character. And also, if you're going to have a silent protagonist, they just want to have some sort of influence to some degree. That's why it's kind of tricky to debate tradition, because there is a way you can ease it in there, but also not completely flip the script and have Link suddenly start saying, "Hi, I'm Link. I'm looking for Zelda. How are you guys doing?" I don't even think he would say anything like that. I don't know what he would sound like. And again, get that out of your head. It doesn't exist. I refuse to acknowledge it. Another reason I feel like silent protagonists exist is simply because of the style or the genre of the game. This is going to be a little trickier, but I'm going to use Dead Space as an example. In Dead Space 1, Isaac Clarke is silent, and I personally enjoyed that because I didn't have someone who was a chatterbox or who made a comment every now and then that reminded me that, hey, someone is here. It felt like, no, I'm the one in that suit. I'm the one getting hurt. This is terrifying for me. But by the time they introduced voices to Isaac in the second game, introduced voices, it's quite the pun there. Get it? Because he has voices in his head? No? Okay then. While I liked it, at the same time I didn't quite feel alone anymore, despite the fact that I technically was whenever he wasn't speaking, but whenever he would, I would get comfortable. Now obviously we have plenty of survival horror games where the protagonist does talk and they're just as scary, but I'm arguing that they can be scarier if the character doesn't talk at all at times. If you could project yourself into the shoes of that character. That'd be like your Dark Souls character speaking all the time. That would be kind of weird. It's a lot more effective if your protagonist in Dark Souls or Bloodborne are just silent. That said, with all of this considered, it's hard to really say whether or not a silent protagonist could make it in today's game industry, or at least in the AAA industry. It's really hard to really push that kind of thing forward because people want to hear voices, people want to see expressions, which you could still have in a silent protagonist, but it's really hard to emphasize that for your general audience because they expect to hear a voice. They don't see any reason why characters shouldn't speak. It's natural. They should talk. Heck, I've seen people even debate on whether or not text boxes should be a thing in 2019. You know, that whole thing. So at that point, even me arguing saying that, hey, you could just have dialogue options and whatnot is kind of thrown out the window if I consider the people who also just don't like text boxes in general or don't like being able to select their dialogue options. They should just have it voiced. It should always be voiced. Why do I have to rely on text? Some people even feel like having dialogue options is also a problem because most of the time they don't really change the ending of your game. However, I want to point out one anomaly, the Stanley Parable. This game is an anomaly because it doesn't have text boxes and Stanley doesn't talk, but at the same time, the narrator narrates everything. So you don't have to speak. The narrator is doing it for you, and every option you choose in the game to do is visual most of the time. So you pick the options and then it gives you a completely different ending based on what you do. But the game is also short enough where you could do this several different ways. You pick one or two, maybe three options, and all of a sudden, different ending. So do I think that silent protagonists need to go, that they're a relic of the past? No. That is a straight up no. However, I do think that developers do need to innovate more on the silent protagonists. Give us options, or at the very least give us things that they're going to do, or maybe occasionally say if they're going to speak at all, but if they don't speak, they need to be expressive. Actions speak louder than words. I can't express that enough. Again, going back to Persona 5, in the very first cutscene you see, Joker is a show-off. A straight-up show-off, and he's smug as all get out. You get that without him uttering a word of dialogue or you selecting a thing, but that is his personality. More of that, please. But I can sit here and talk about this all day. I want to know what you guys think. Do you think that silent protagonists really are a relic of the past? What do you think can be done to change them up? Why do you not like silent protagonists? And do you think silent protagonists only exist these days because of tradition or style? Let me know what you think. I'm curious about your opinion. I hope you guys have enjoyed your stay. I'm TUSDarryl. See you later.